I remember the sound more than anything. Not the sound of what happened to her. No sharp noise, no final note. Just the low hum of the refrigerator in that small apartment. The faint tap of a ceiling fan clicking every third rotation. The way the evening outside seemed to stop just short of the window, as if the world were holding its breath. It is strange, even now, how peaceful the room looked. A vase of slightly wilted lilies on the coffee table, a half-finished cup of tea with the faintest ring on its white surface, a book left open as though she had meant to return to it after a brief pause. Only the stillness of her body suggested that the pause had stretched into something nameless, something we did not yet understand, something we were too quick to name. Back then I was not the lead on the case. I was the younger one in the background, holding the notepad, saying yes, sir, and of course. The others spoke in low, careful phrases, gently placing labels on the silence like bandages. Possibly self-inflicted, one said, while another murmured, "We shouldn't rule out another person." No one wanted to say anything too firmly. No one wanted to be wrong about her. Her name was Elara Costas, 27. A name that felt strange in my mouth, like a language I hadn't learned properly. The report said she was born inland, in a town where summers were dry and the sky stretched open with too much light. She had moved to this coastal part of California for art school, then stayed for reasons no one could quite agree upon. Some said it was the ocean. Others said it was someone she loved once but no longer spoke to. There were no marks that made things simple. No dramatic note with clear apologies or explanations. No signs of forced entry that would have neatly shifted the weight of responsibility away from her and onto some faceless stranger. The coroner's initial language was like fog, soft, dense, and obscuring everything important. Undetermined manner of death. I remember reading that phrase over and over, feeling something restless in my chest. Her mother, when she arrived at the station, did not cry loudly. She sat in the interview room with her hands in her lap and her back straight, as if this were some formal appointment she needed to endure with dignity. Her eyes were a dark, quiet ocean. When we asked if Elara had seemed distressed lately, she paused for a long time, looking not at us but at the wall behind us, where the paint was slightly chipped near the ceiling. She was thoughtful, her mother finally said. She carried things inside, I'm not sure what they were. I wrote that down, carried things inside, as if that were an observable fact like height or hair color. There was an old photograph of Elara on the side table in the apartment, taken, I guessed, some years before. She was outdoors, standing in front of a mural she'd painted, bright colors, sweeping shapes that curved into each other like joined hands. Her smile was gentle but cautious, as though she knew someone would someday look back at this moment and search it for a sign of how the story would end. I stood there a long time, staring at the photo after the others stepped out, pretending to check the surroundings. The room had that quiet hum of a life interrupted, bills stacked but not yet opened, a toothbrush still damp, shoes by the door that seemed to be waiting for their owner to slide into them and leave. I remember thinking that we weren't investigating a scene as much as an unfinished sentence. The two possible narratives hung over everything we touched. If we called it a choice she made, then all the love around her, mother, friends, whoever she had once trusted, would be left wondering what they failed to see or failed to say. If we called it something done to her, then every person who had been close to her might suddenly carry the shadow of suspicion, whether they deserved it or not. Either way, someone would be blamed. We did what we could, or what we thought we could. Timelines were drawn. People close to her were quietly asked to remember their last conversations, their last messages, their last glimpses of her. All of it became data points, stripped of tone and warmth, pinned to a board like small, fluttering moths. But there were gaps, long stretches of days in her life that no one could fill in. Hours where no one knew who she had spoken to, or what she had thought about while staring at the ocean she used to paint. We learned a few things. She sometimes stayed late at the small gallery where she worked. She had once been engaged but returned the ring. She shared her art rarely and destroyed a lot of it before anyone could see. The case went cold the way a late afternoon dims into evening, gradually, almost politely. There was no firm declaration of closure, just fewer mentions of her name in the department, fewer documents crossing the desk. Undetermined, the file said, and the word became a lid that could be shut when the room grew too quiet and someone needed space on a shelf. Still, sometimes when I closed my eyes, I saw that apartment again. The lilies, a little tired but still fragrant. The open book. The way her head rested at a slight angle, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. I didn't know then whether I was remembering what I had actually seen, or what I needed to see so that the uncertainty felt bearable. I told myself there was nothing more we could have done, that some endings remain unwritten even when lives are involved. But even back then, before the document resurfaced, before the witness finally spoke, before the community would use words like solved and answered, I felt it. A faint discomfort, like a stone in my shoe that I could never quite find. The sense that somewhere in all that quiet we had missed something. Something small. Something human. 2. A forgotten witness or document reopens the cold investigation. Almost 20 years later, the file found its way back to my desk with the soft thud of something returning from a long absence. The cover was worn at the edges, the ink of her name slightly faded but still legible. Elara Costas. The box left in the hallway had a yellow label, Archive Cleanup, Review Before Shred. Someone had decided to make space in the old evidence room, and in doing so, had disturbed a layer of settled dust that had once protected the past from reconsideration. Inside the box, beneath a stack of reports from other years, I found a thin manila envelope marked with a date, September 2006, the same month she had been found. It was stamped received, but the ink of the initial beneath it had bled into the paper, unreadable. The envelope had never been logged properly. No one had filed it with the main case documents. It had simply been placed in the wrong box, left to live in the quiet. I slid the paper out with that small sense of ceremony reserved for things that might matter in ways we can't yet see. Inside was a single-page statement, handwritten. The handwriting was careful but uneven, with hesitations reflected in the tremor of certain letters. I saw her that night, it began. The writer was someone we had never formally interviewed. Daniel Mora, apartment 3B, same building, one floor above. In our original notes, his name appeared only once, under a list of residents present the day the body was found. There had been no indication that he wanted to speak, and no one had pushed further. The statement described a moment around dusk. Daniel wrote that he had stepped onto the shared stairwell landing to smoke, and had seen Elara standing outside her own door, keys in hand, staring at something he couldn't see. She had looked, he said, as though she were listening to a voice only she heard. He had said her name. She had glanced up, almost startled, then smiled faintly and replied, "I'm fine." Then came the part that unsettled me. She asked me, Daniel had written, if I believed people could start over without disappearing. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. She laughed a little, like I'd given the wrong answer. There was a pause in the sentence, indicated by a long gap between words, where the pen seemed to have hovered. I didn't want to bother her, he continued. She seemed far away even though she was standing right there. I went back inside. I think I heard someone else come up the stairs later, but I'm not sure. I might be remembering wrong. At the bottom, there was an unfinished line, A stray sentence crossed out so hard the paper nearly tore. Only a few letters remained visible around the thick black strokes, like something whispered and then swallowed. I sat at my desk, the statement trembling slightly between my fingers. Not because it provided a clear answer. If anything, it added more distance between what we knew and what we thought we knew. But because its existence meant that our original understanding of the case had been incomplete. Not by choice, perhaps, but incomplete all the same. There was no time stamp to show when the statement had been delivered. No record that anyone had followed up. For all I knew, it had been left at the front desk the week after her passing and then quietly misplaced, like a thought someone doesn't know what to do with. I took the envelope to the captain's office. The department had changed since 2006, new faces, new software, old stories still floating in the air. The captain listened while I explained, his expression steady but intent, tapping a finger gently against the desk as if marking some internal rhythm. "We missed him," he said at last. "You think this changes things?" "It changes what we didn't see," I answered. "At the very least, we owe it to her to ask why." He sighed. "You want it reopened." I didn't say yes immediately. Instead, I thought about her mother's quiet composure, the way she had looked not at us but through us. I thought about the word undetermined, how it had seemed like a final line, and how this forgotten page now slipped under it like a new layer of interpretation. "I want to understand why this was never followed up," I said, "and I want to talk to him, to hear how he remembers her now." The captain nodded slowly, some part of him weighing the administrative effort against an old sense of duty that stubbornly refused to age. "We'll mark it as active review," he decided. "Not fully reopened yet. See what you find." Later, alone in the records room, I went through the rest of the box. Tucked behind a stack of photographs was something else, a photocopy of an unsigned letter, found in her apartment but considered personal and unrelated to cause of death. Its edges were clipped slightly, like someone had been in a hurry. The letter addressed no one by name. It spoke in second person, tender and distant at the same time. "You say I always walk away before I explain. I don't know how to tell you that sometimes I can't tell the difference between running from pain and running toward a different kind of peace." There was no clear confession, no direct mention of harm, just an emotional geography with blurred borders, regret, attachment, a promise half made and half revoked. If this was connected to someone in her life, we had never identified them. The original team had noted it as possible evidence of a restless mind, then folded it back into the narrative of uncertainty. Now, reading it with years between us, I didn't see a person who wanted to vanish as much as someone negotiating with herself, struggling to balance two irreconcilable needs: the desire to stay and the desire to be free of whatever weighed on her. The more I looked, the more I felt the past rearranging itself around me, like furniture shifted in a familiar room when the lights were off. The discovery of the statement and the letter did not brighten anything. Instead, they deepened the shadows, giving them shape and texture. It would have been easier if the document had revealed something straightforward, an admission, a threat, a clear reference to someone who meant her harm. But what I held were not answers. They were questions that had waited quietly for nearly 2 decades, patient and unresolved. When I finally tracked down an old address for Daniel Mora, it led to a quiet neighborhood further inland. According to the database, he had moved several times, each location modest, each lease relatively short. There was no obvious pattern, only a sense of someone who never quite settled. On the drive out, the sky reminded me of the day we found her, muted, uncertain, hovering between brightness and overcast. I felt the familiar guilt rise again, that low, steady presence. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just constant. We had closed her story without seeing all of it. Now something or someone was asking us to look again. 3. Investigator focuses on human psychology more than physical clues. By the time I stood at Daniel Mora's door, I knew that what I needed from him was not a timeline. It was a feeling, a memory traced in the language of pauses and glances, the kinds of details that never make it into written statements but linger in the mind. He opened the door halfway at first, as if bracing himself. His hair had thinned at the temples, and faint lines creased his forehead, not from age alone but from effort, like he'd been thinking hard for a very long time. When I introduced myself and mentioned Elara's name, he closed his eyes for a fleeting second, as though the sound of it was both familiar and fragile. "That was a long time ago," he said softly. "Yes," I answered, "but not for everyone." He let me in. The apartment was neat, almost careful. Books stacked in thoughtful piles, a single plant near the window, its leaves reaching toward the light. On a side table sat a mug half full, the steam long gone but the scent of something herbal still in the air. "I didn't think anyone would come about that," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I tried to tell someone, I thought I did." "You did," I told him, placing the statement on the coffee table between us. "This got lost. That wasn't your fault." He glanced at the page and then away, his jaw tightening. "I don't remember exactly what I wrote. I remember the feeling of writing it. Like if I didn't, I'd be carrying something alone." "What were you carrying?" I asked. He took his time answering. His hands folded and unfolded themselves in his lap, fingers tracing invisible patterns. "She looked distant," he said. "Not sad exactly, just somewhere else. I'd seen her around, you know. We'd nod in the hallway. Sometimes we'd talk about the murals downtown or the weather, nothing very deep. But that evening, she seemed like she was in the middle of some decision that I couldn't see." "Did you feel worried?" "Yes and no." He winced a little at his own response, as if hearing how unsatisfying it sounded. I told myself it wasn't my place to ask more. She said she was okay, and I wanted to believe her. I watched his face as he spoke. The guilt there wasn't sharp or theatrical, it was quieter, a long-term companion. He wasn't rehearsing this for me. He was revisiting it. "You mentioned in your statement that you might have heard someone later," I said gently. The night she was found." He nodded slowly. "I still don't know if that's real or if I built it afterward. Memory is tricky, isn't it? Sometimes I think I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavier than hers. Other times I think I'm just trying to give myself a reason for not going back out to check on her." The words hung between us. I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I thought about knocking on her door after our little conversation," he continued, "asking if she wanted to talk. I even opened my door halfway at one point. Then I told myself I was being dramatic, that she would think I was intruding, so I stayed inside." He looked up at me then, eyes searching my face. "Do you think that makes me a bad person?" This was the kind of question I had learned not to answer directly. People don't really ask for truth with questions like that. They ask for a way to live with themselves. "I think it makes you human," I said carefully. "We don't always know in the moment which gestures matter." He looked away, his throat working. "I still hear her voice sometimes. The way she said that thing about starting over without disappearing. I've tried to understand what she meant. I keep wondering if she was asking for help and I just didn't hear it right." I thought of the letter in her file, the line about not knowing how to explain the difference between running from pain and running toward peace. It sounded like the same internal language. A person torn between leaving and staying, between being seen and staying hidden. Did you know much about her life? I asked. People she spent time with, anyone who visited often. A woman came sometimes, he said. Short hair, sharp eyes. They'd talk in the hallway and their voices would go quiet whenever I passed. Not in a suspicious way, just private. I got the feeling they were once very close. Romantic. I don't know, he shrugged. There was also a man with her once or twice, older than her by a bit. He had this careful way of standing, like someone used to speaking in front of people. I assumed he was from the gallery or some art thing. His descriptors were more about posture, tone, and mood than clothes or physical features. He remembered emotional traces more than concrete details. It told me as much about him as it did about them. After I left Daniel's apartment, I didn't rush back to the station. Instead, I drove to the coast near where she used to live. The ocean was out there somewhere beyond the houses and parking lots. Its presence felt even when unseen. I found a small bench near a weathered mural, faded, but still graceful in its design, and sat for a while. I thought about Elara as a collection of impressions. A young woman in a photograph, half smiling in front of her own art. A daughter whose mother described her as someone who carried